The courtroom buzzed with a restless energy, like a storm about to break. Rows of spectators leaned forward, their whispers sharp and urgent as the heavy oak doors swung open. Jasmine Crockett strode in, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her face a mask of fierce determination. Across the room, Elon Musk slouched in his chair, his lips curled in a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. The air crackled with hostility, the kind that made your skin prickle. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal, and everyone in the room knew it. Jasmine's hands gripped a stack of documents, her knuckles pale from the force. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood at her table, staring down the man who'd built an empire on innovation and arrogance. The case had exploded into the public eye months ago, when whistleblowers from Musk's flagship company, Tech Trend Innovations, leaked evidence of illegal practices. They claimed Musk had knowingly sold faulty energy systems to small towns, systems that failed and left communities in chaos. Jasmine, a congresswoman with a reputation for taking on giants, had championed the victims, filing a class-action lawsuit that now threatened to dismantle Musk's legacy. Elon shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming on the table. He didn't look worried, not yet. To him, this was just another hurdle, another critic to silence with charm or cash. But Jasmine wasn't here to negotiate. Her voice cut through the room as she addressed the judge, her words sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, this man has built his fortune on lies. He's not a visionary. He's a predator, preying on people who trusted him." The crowd gasped, and Elon's smirk faltered just for a second. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled tight, banged her gavel. "Order," she snapped, but her eyes flicked between the two, sensing the storm brewing. Jasmine didn't flinch. She slapped a document onto the table, her voice rising. "These are emails, signed by Musk himself, proving he knew the systems were defective. He sold them anyway, pocketing millions while towns went dark." The spectators erupted, some shouting, others scribbling notes. Elon's lawyer, a wiry man in a pinstripe suit, jumped up, objecting, but Jasmine talked over him, her words relentless. Elon's face darkened as he leaned forward, his voice low but venomous. "You're out of your depth, Crockett. You think you can tear me down with a few pieces of paper? I've faced worse than you." The room stilled, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Jasmine didn't back down. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "You're not untouchable, Musk. Not today. Those people you ruined. They're my people, and I'm here to make you pay." Her words landed like a punch, and the crowd roared, some cheering, others jeering. The atmosphere shifted, charged with raw emotion. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like insects. The judge called for silence again, but it was clear she was struggling to control the room. Elon's jaw tightened, his casual confidence cracking. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, not by someone who matched his fire with her own. Jasmine, meanwhile, felt the weight of every eye on her, but it only fueled her. She'd spent months preparing, poring over evidence, meeting with families who'd lost everything. This wasn't just a case. It was a crusade. A woman in the front row, her face lined with worry, clutched a photo of her home, now abandoned after the energy system failed. She watched Jasmine, her eyes shining with hope. That hope drove Jasmine forward, even as Elon's lawyer tried to derail her with technicalities. "Your Honor, these documents lack context," the lawyer argued, his voice nasal and smug. Jasmine shot back, "Context? The context is greed. The context is a man who'd rather let towns burn than admit he was wrong." The crowd murmured, the sound swelling like a wave. Elon stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Enough!" he barked, his voice echoing. "You want to play hero, Crockett? You're nothing but a loudmouth with a grudge." The insult hung in the air, ugly and raw. Jasmine's lips twitched, not in a smile, but in something fiercer. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Keep talking, Musk. Every word you say is another nail in your empire's coffin." The room held, its breath waiting for the next blow, as the two stood locked in a battle that was only just beginning. Jasmine's words still echoed in the courtroom, sharp and unyielding, as she stepped back from the table. The spectators sat rigid, their eyes darting between her and Elon, who glared with a fury that seemed to burn the air. The judge's gavel struck again, a hollow thud that did little to calm the chaos. Jasmine didn't sit. She paced, slow and deliberate, her heels marking each step like a countdown. She held another document, this one thicker, its edges worn from her relentless review. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the stakes climbed higher. Elon's lawyer scrambled to regain control, his voice shrill as he waved a hand. "Your Honor, this is a circus. The plaintiff's theatrics are irrelevant to the facts." But the crowd wasn't listening. They were watching Jasmine, who turned to face the judge, her expression fierce but controlled. "The facts?" she said, her voice slicing through the noise. "The facts are in these pages. Testimonies from engineers who warned Musk the systems would fail. He ignored them, fired them, buried their reports." She held up the document, letting the weight of her words sink in. A murmur rippled through the room, low and angry. An older man in the back, his hands calloused from years of labor, clenched his fists. He'd lost his small business when the power grid collapsed in his town. Jasmine's fight was his fight, and he leaned forward, hanging on her every word. She felt the crowd's energy, their pain and hope fueling her. "These aren't just papers," she said, her voice steady, "but burning. These are lives, families, communities Musk threw away for profit." The judge's face tightened, her pen pausing over her notes. Elon laughed, a harsh, grating sound that cut through the tension. He leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes glinting with defiance. "You're preaching, Crockett, not proving. You think you can guilt me into submission? I built this world you're standing in. You're welcome." The arrogance in his tone sparked a fresh wave of gasps. A woman in the gallery stood shouting, "You ruined us!" before ushers pulled her back. The room teetered on the edge of chaos, every word a match threatening to ignite it. Jasmine didn't blink. She walked to the witness stand, where a nervous engineer, a former Tech Trend employee, waited. His hands trembled, but his jaw was set. "Tell them," Jasmine said, her voice firm but kind. The engineer cleared his throat, glancing at Elon, who stared back, unyielding. "I told him," the engineer said, his voice shaky at first. "I told Musk the systems weren't safe. He said to ship them anyway. Said the buyers wouldn't know the difference." The crowd erupted, shouts of outrage drowning out the lawyer's objections. The judge's face grew sterner, her gavel pounding harder. "Silence, or I'll clear this room," she warned. But the damage was done. Elon's mask of confidence slipped, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. "You're lying," he snapped at the engineer, his voice raw with anger. "You were incompetent. I fired you for cause." The engineer flinched but didn't back down. "I have the emails," he said, quieter now, but resolute. "You knew. You didn't care." Jasmine seized the moment, her voice rising like a tide. "This is the man you call a genius? A man who silences truth to protect his ego?" She turned to Elon, her gaze unrelenting. "You're not a builder, Musk. You're a wrecking ball." The words landed hard, and Elon's hands clenched into fists. He stood again, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures. "You want to talk about truth?" he snarled. "You're a politician, Crockett. You twist everything for votes. This isn't justice, it's a witch hunt." The accusation stung, but Jasmine was ready. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "A witch hunt? No, Musk, this is accountability. You've dodged it your whole life, but not today." The crowd roared. their voices a mix of cheers and jeers. The judge called for order again, but her authority felt fragile, the room alive with raw emotion. Jasmine turned to the engineer, nodding for him to continue. He pulled out a flash drive, his hands steadier now. "There's more," he said. "Recordings, meetings where Musk laughed about the risks." The room froze, every eye on that small device, the key to unraveling an empire. The engineer's words hung in the courtroom, heavy as a guillotine. The flash drive in his hand gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a tiny object carrying the weight of ruin. Spectators held their breath, their faces a mix of shock and anticipation. Jasmine stood tall, her eyes blazing with purpose, while Elon's composure cracked further, his fingers twitching as if he could snatch the drive away. The judge's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. "Counselor, present this evidence. Now." Her tone left no room for delay, and the room braced for impact. Jasmine moved swiftly, taking the flash drive and handing it to a clerk, who connected it to a laptop. The crowd leaned forward, their murmurs a low hum of excitement. An older woman in the gallery, her scarf knotted tightly, whispered a prayer, her town one of those left in darkness by Musk's machines. Jasmine felt the weight of their trust, a fire in her chest that burned hotter with every second. She turned to the judge, her voice clear and unyielding. "These recordings will show Musk's true character. Not a leader, but a man who gambled, with lives and laughed about it." Elon's lawyer leapt up, his face red with desperation. "This is unverified, a stunt to prejudice the court," he shouted, but his words sounded hollow, drowned by the crowd's restless energy. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "I'll decide what's admissible," she said, her eyes narrowing. The clerk cued the first recording, and a grainy audio filled the room. Musk's voice, unmistakable, echoed through the speakers. "If a few towns lose power, so what? They'll buy the next model. Profits in the churn." Laughter followed, cold and careless. The crowd gasped, then roared, their outrage shaking the walls. A man in the back stood, his voice breaking as he yelled, "You monster!" Ushers moved to quiet him, but others joined in, their shouts a chorus of pain. Jasmine kept her focus, her face a mask of controlled fury. She pointed at Elon, her voice cutting through the chaos. "That's who you are, Musk. You heard suffering, and saw dollar signs." Elon's eyes flashed, his calm shattered. He slammed a fist on the table, his voice raw. "You're spinning this, Crockett. That was a private meeting. You're twisting my words to play the hero." The accusation barely landed. Jasmine stepped closer, her presence commanding the room. "Twisting? Your own voice convicts you. You knew the risks. You chose greed." The crowd cheered, their voices swelling like a tide. Elon's face twisted, his arrogance giving way to something uglier. "You think you're pure?" he spat, leaning forward. "You're just writing this for clout. Those people mean nothing to you. You're using them." The words were venomous, meant to wound, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She smiled, cold and sharp. "Keep digging, Musk. You're burying yourself." The judge banged her gavel, her patience fraying. "Enough! Both of you sit." But neither moved, locked in a stare that felt like it could spark flames. The clerk played another recording, this one worse. Musk's voice again, mocking a whistleblower. "Let them sue. They'll never touch me. I'm untouchable." The room exploded, spectators shouting, some in tears. A young man in the front row, his town bankrupt from the failures, gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Jasmine saw him, her resolve hardening. This was for him, for all of them. Elon's lawyer tried to interrupt, stammering about chain of custody, but the judge cut him off. "I've heard enough objections," she said, her voice like steel. "The evidence stands." Elon's face paled, the reality hitting. He turned to Jasmine, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think this ends me? I'll rebuild. I always do. Jasmine met his gaze, unflinching. Not this time. You're done running. The crowd's cheers grew, louder, a wave of support that lifted her. The judge called for a recess, but the tension didn't break. Jasmine glanced at the flash drive, knowing more recordings waited, each one a hammer poised to shatter Musk's empire further. The courtroom doors swung shut as the recess ended, sealing in the charged atmosphere. Spectators settled into their seats, their faces taut with expectation, the earlier recordings still ringing in their ears. Jasmine stood at her table, her posture unyielding, a stack of new documents in hand. Across the room, Elon sat rigid, his eyes burning with a mix of defiance and dread. The judge's stern gaze swept the room, her presence a thin tether holding back the chaos. The clerk restarted the laptop, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for the next blow. Jasmine's voice broke the silence, steady but laced with fury. Your Honor, the recordings were just the start. These documents detail how Musk covered his tracks. She held up a thick folder, its pages marked with red tabs. Bank transfers, fake invoices, shell companies. He didn't just know the systems were faulty. He built a web of lies to hide it. The crowd stirred, their murmurs sharp and angry. An older man in the gallery, his savings wiped out by the energy failures, gripped his cane, his eyes locked on Jasmine. Her fight gave him hope, a spark in the darkness. Elon's lawyer jumped up, his voice shrill. This is speculation. No proof links my client to these transactions. But Jasmine was ready. She slid a document across the table to the clerk, her eyes never leaving Elon. This is a wire transfer, signed by Musk, funneling millions to an offshore account. The same account paid to silence whistleblowers. The clerk projected the document onto a screen, the numbers stark and damning. The crowd gasped, their outrage swelling. A woman in the back, her home lost to debt, covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Elon's face twisted, his control slipping further. He stood, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures. You're desperate, Crockett, he snarled, his voice echoing. Faking documents now? You'll pay for this. The threat landed hard, but Jasmine didn't waver. She stepped forward, her voice low and cutting. Faking? These are your signatures, Musk. Your lies. You can't bully your way out of this. The crowd roared, their cheers a wave of support. The judge banged her gavel, but the noise barely dimmed, the room alive with raw emotion. The clerk cued another recording, this one chilling. Musk's voice, calm and calculating, filled the air. If anyone talks, bury them. Lawsuits, blackmail, whatever it takes. The crowd's reaction was instant, shouts of disgust mixing with cries of betrayal. A young woman in the front row, her family displaced by the failures, clenched her fists, her face a mask of anger. Jasmine saw her drawing strength from her pain. This is your empire, Jasmine said, turning to Elon. Built on threats, not dreams. You're no genius. You're a coward. Elon's eyes flashed, his voice a low growl. You're nothing, Crockett, a nobody with a vendetta. I'll crush you. The words were meant to intimidate, but they only fueled her. Jasmine leaned across the table, her voice steady as steel. Try it, Musk. Every move you make just proves me right. The crowd cheered louder, their voices shaking the room. The judge's gavel struck again, her voice sharp. Order! One more outburst and I'll hold you both in contempt. But the warning felt distant, the battle too intense to pause. Jasmine turned to the judge, her tone measured but fierce. Your Honor, these documents and recordings show a pattern. Musk didn't just make mistakes. He planned this. He profited from pain. The judge's face was unreadable, but her pen moved quickly, noting every word. Elon's lawyer tried to object, stammering about authenticity, but the evidence was overwhelming. The crowd's energy surged, their hope and anger intertwined. A man in the gallery, his town still rebuilding, nodded at Jasmine, his eyes shining with gratitude. Elon sank into his chair, his defiance crumbling. He glared at Jasmine, but his bravado was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "You think you've won?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. Jasmine met his gaze, unflinching. "This isn't about winning. It's about justice. And it's coming for you." The room pulsed with anticipation, the weight of her words settling over everyone. The judge called for the next witness, a former executive ready to testify, and the crowd braced for the final unraveling of Musk's empire. The courtroom felt alive, its walls vibrating with the crowd's restless energy. The judge's stern command for silence barely held as the next witness, a former tech trend executive, took the stand. Her hands were steady, her face etched with resolve. Jasmine stood nearby, her eyes sharp and unyielding, while Elon slumped in his chair, his earlier fire reduced to smoldering resentment. The evidence had piled up, each piece a brick in the wall closing him in. The spectators watched, their hope and anger a palpable force, ready for the final blow. The executive's voice was clear, cutting through the tension. "I was in the room when Musk made the calls," she said, her gaze steady. "He ordered us to hide the defects, to bribe regulators, to shred complaints. He said no one could stop him." The crowd erupted, their shouts a mix of fury and vindication. An older woman in the gallery, her savings gone to Musk's schemes, clutched her neighbor's hand, her face alight with hope. Jasmine nodded at the witness, her voice firm. "Tell them what happened when you spoke up." The executive's jaw tightened. "I warned him people would suffer. He laughed, said I was weak. Then he had me fired, my reputation ruined." The room grew louder, the crowd's outrage shaking the air. A man in the back, his business destroyed by the outages, stood, his voice hoarse. "You stole our lives." Ushers moved to quiet him, but the sentiment echoed, raw and unstoppable. Jasmine turned to the judge, her voice rising. "This is Musk's legacy, Your Honor. Not innovation, but destruction." Elon's lawyer scrambled, his objections frantic. "Hearsay, this witness is biased." But the judge's face was stone, her pen still. "Overruled," she said, her tone final. The executive continued, producing a notebook filled with dates, names, and deals Musk had orchestrated to bury the truth. The clerk projected pages onto the screen, each one a dagger. The crowd leaned forward, their breaths short, as the scope of Musk's betrayal sank in. A young man in the front, his family still in debt, wiped his eyes, his anger giving way to relief. Elon stood, his voice a raw snarl. "You're all liars. I built everything you have. You can't do this." The desperation in his tone was new, a crack in his armor that widened with every word. Jasmine stepped forward, her presence commanding. "You built nothing but a house of cards, Musk. And it's falling." The crowd roared, their cheers a thunderous wave. She turned to the judge, her voice steady but fierce. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Musk defrauded thousands, ruined lives, and lied to cover it. He must face justice." The judge's gaze swept the room, her silence heavy. Then she spoke, her words deliberate. "I've seen enough. The evidence is overwhelming. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiffs." The crowd exploded, cheers and sobs mingling as people embraced. The woman with the scarf stood, her prayer answered, while the man with the cane raised a trembling fist. Jasmine's face softened, a flicker of relief breaking through her resolve. She'd fought for them, and they'd won. Elon's face was ashen, his empire crumbling in real time. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously, their stories already writing his downfall. His lawyer slumped, defeated, as Musk muttered, "This isn't over." But his voice lacked conviction, drowned by the crowd's triumph. Jasmine met his gaze one last time, her voice low and final. "It's over, Musk. You're done." The words landed like a gavel, sealing his fate. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a celebration of justice, hard won. As the judge dismissed the court, the room buzzed with life. Families hugged, strangers shared smiles, their pain eased by the verdict. Jasmine gathered her documents, her shoulders lighter now. The young man from the front approached, his voice quiet. "Thank you. You gave us our future back." She nodded, her eyes warm. Outside, the world waited, ready to hear how one woman's fight had toppled a titan. The courtroom emptied, but the victory lingered, a beacon for all who'd been wronged, proof that even empires could fall.